How's it going, guys? Angus here from Maker's Muse. So welcome to another 3D printing Q&A video. So how this works is I put out the question to my fantastic Patreon supporters, what were their burning 3D printing questions, and I would answer them in a video. So I'm going to go through 10 in today's video, and then I'm going to do a few more in the series. I got tons of questions from you guys. It's fantastic, but it's just too many to go through in one video. So I'm going to go through 10, and then there'll be more coming in the next few weeks. So we're starting out with Kalani Ripley, who asked, what are my thoughts on the used 3D printer market? What do you think people should do? Save for an expensive printer or buy a cheaper one? So that's kind of two questions, but let's go over the used one for a start. So you're looking for one of two things. You're probably looking for a machine that's not being used much by someone who thought 3D printing was cool, but then never touched the machine. That's ideally what you want. Or you're looking for a machine that's been well looked after and used a lot. So the second one, you're more looking for like the Stratasys systems and that sort of thing for industry, but ideally you don't want to buy a well-used and well-loved hobby machine. I wouldn't really recommend that because you don't know what's been done to it, and invariably bad things have probably happened to it. So personally, I would recommend looking for a machine with very low hours bought by someone who didn't really get into 3D printing and want to sell them on. So you can usually see in most sort of machines like the Da Vinci's and the Ups how much filament's being pushed through them. You can't really do that on some others. You can see total print time on Marlin firmware on a lot of these machines as well. So try to get an idea if it's been used a lot or if it's just been used for like 100 hours or something. If it's not been used much at all and looks in good condition, then yeah, you can probably get a pretty good deal. Otherwise, yeah, buying a new one's not really that expensive. And in terms of your second question, save for an expensive printer or buy a cheap one, I recommend buying the machine that you can afford at the time and then upgrading later. Don't wait for that perfect machine in future because you're just putting off all that learning you could be doing in the meantime. So I do have my video on my machines I recommend under $300. You can definitely go too cheap, but $300 US definitely buys you a machine that will work and teach you everything you need to know about 3D printing. Right, so Ian Douglas is asking, I'm brand new to 3D printing, so I haven't even purchased a unit yet. And he's basically saying, I see you and others promoting Polymaker PolyMax PLA. Lots of P's. It's almost twice the price. Is it worth it for an absolute beginner, or am I better to start with lower cost PLA? Okay, I understand your question. So PolyMax PLA is a strength modified PLA. So for example, I just happen to have this robot in front of me. These top plates and these wheel hubs are PolyMax PLA. They're tougher than regular PLA like this cat, which means they're not going to shatter as easily. But if you're just printing stuff like this cat, then you don't need that, and you're better off with cheap PLA. In this case, this is like $20 a kilo PLA, whereas this stuff, as you said, Polymaker PolyMax is a lot more expensive. But if you're printing stuff where you need the strength and you need the reliability and guarantee of sort of dimensional accuracy, I suppose, of the filament, then Polymaker is a premium brand. But if you're just starting out and you don't want the strength, you don't worry, you don't care about that, yeah, it's definitely overkill. I would cry actually if people were printing stuff like this in Polymax. It's definitely a waste of the filament in my opinion. David Ashby's asking, I've always wanted to know what printers are the best for modding, and what mods do you think are suitable for beginners, intermediate, and professional? So for beginners, I would say get a printer that is ready to run, like the Wanhao i3, that does actually take on mods quite well, and you can improve it with some simple modifications. Intermediate, maybe buy a full kit and then modify it. And advanced, dude, build your own printer. Spec out what your dream printer would be and make it from scratch. If you're interested in modding and doing it as a hobby, then yeah, you just make something from scratch, like use ball screws and servo motors, whatever your budget allows for, to build something from scratch and make it a passion project. But for beginners, yeah, buy something ready to run where you can change the fan shroud and things like that. But you really want something that is a working platform to start with if you're a beginner. That's my thoughts anyway. Just worth noting, I'm not going through the questions that are material specific that I haven't tried personally, because that would be unfair advice. I will answer them personally in Patreon though. So Joel Telling, of course Joel is asking, what do you think is the next big step 3D printing needs to take? I think it needs to take a step back from the race to the bottom. I've just made a video on why 3D printed kits can be a bad idea, and I think people need to stop and think what they're getting into, and really, are you trying to get a cheap 3D printer, like just buying on price, or do you want something that will actually give you a good experience? Stop giving these suppliers your money for a cheap machine that won't work and just cause you more pain. Actually, talk with your wallet and buy something that's actually worthwhile from reputable suppliers and support those people to actually get something that will work and a company that will survive. Personally, You know, there is kits you can buy for 150 bucks US, like the Tronxy and stuff like that. They're okay, but really, I think 3D printers need to stop being cheap and start being more reliable. There's too many machines on the market in 2017 which aren't reliable, even day-to-day printing once they've been tuned. They fall out of alignment, prints stop sticking. Come on guys, it's FDM, it's been around for 30 years, something like that. I mean, you know, it needs to work, it needs to be reliable. Get it sorted. Moving on. All right, next question from Chris Sevelos. He's asking, do you think the multi-material upgrade for the Prusa Mark II S, probably it's the newest one, is worth considering the huge purge block it creates? Right, multi-material printing. I don't have a single multi-material printer, and the one I did, which is the Raise N2 Plus, I took the second nozzle off. Why? Personally, I think multicolor printing is a bit of a gimmick. I'm sorry, that's just my opinion. And for multi-printing with the actual single nozzle, yes, the purge block is ridiculous. So I feel that you're wasting a lot of material and time going to the lengths of doing a multi-material print when you could just paint it afterwards, and it does waste a lot of filament. I think we're going to get to the point where large prints could fill inside the model and do the changeover as infill. We'll probably get to that point in terms of G-code, but right now I'm not behind the idea of a purge block. I think it is a waste, and that's just my opinion. I wouldn't do it myself. It's not something I'd go for, but if you are into multicolor prints, then absolutely go for it. If that's something you want to do, you know, at the end of the day, it's PLA. If you're printing with that, it's biodegradable, it's renewable. Do you really care if you're wasting it? It's a price thing. Yeah, if it doesn't bother you, then go for it. Alrighty, next question from Marcus Cruz. What is the biggest bottleneck for printing speed? Depending on the printer, I'm sure. I'm getting very good results at 50 millimeters per second at 0.2 millimeter layer heights. Thinking of increasing it. I keep my filament in an airtight box and it goes through a tube to the printer. It adds a little resistance. In the past, I've often gotten under extrusion. The box seems to have fixed that. Right, well, the biggest bottleneck in speed is how fast you can melt it. So in terms of the printing, I did experiments with my 1 millimeter nozzle to print that thing there. And the biggest bottleneck is how fast you can melt that plastic and cool it. So you're going to need to basically have two extremes, a really powerful hot end that can melt this PLA or whatever plastic really quickly, then a really powerful cooler to cool it and set it quickly, because you know you might cool the outside, but the inside will stay molten for a while, which causes warping issues, causes drooping, and all sorts of other problems. So that's the biggest bottleneck. So it's nozzle size, and basically, yeah, it gets to ridiculous extremes where you might need really powerful heaters to print a little bit faster. 50 is pretty good. 60 is probably what I would print normally on many machines that I'd say is a good fast speed. And then going from there, you're going to start to run into this melting issue that I mentioned. So like with deltas, they can print ridiculously fast, but often it's the melting that holds them back. And also they've got the Bowden feeder, which can add sort of compression and elastic issues with the filament. So that's the biggest hurdle for them, but yeah, it's definitely the melting in my opinion. Okay, next question. So Nathan is asking, is the Flexion extruder good for everyday use and a wide range of materials? Are there any drawbacks to printing any other materials besides flexible? I'm thinking of putting it on my original Mark II S. I would say it's not worth it for the Mark II S. It's not designed for that. It's designed for Mark X style extruders like the Wanhao and the MakerBots and the Flash Forges have. It's not designed to bolt onto the Prusa. So you're going to have to do a lot of modifications. And unless you're just printing flexibles, it is an expensive upgrade, and it does print PLA beautifully, but it's not worth it to just print PLA. It's only really if you want to print stupidly flexible materials like that. You know, I've got underneath this robot, you know, the X60, which is ridiculously flexible. It's only printable on the Flexion. But in the Prusa, you can just print flexibles with stock hardware. You just need to go a lot slower, and I've got a video on how to do it in this card here. That's the one. Okay, next question from Sergio, who's asking, any tips on preventing modified PLA filaments from clogging in an all-metal hot end other than trying a different filament provider? I can't get through an entire benchy without a clogged nozzle. Tried a bunch of different temperatures, no luck. So the UP machines have this issue. They're an all-metal extruder, and I've wondered for years, before I really knew what was going on, why some PLAs would jam and some don't. It's because when you're forcing the filament through that metal hot end, it's melting slightly and becoming very high in terms of its friction against the walls of that tube. which then basically sticks to that tube and the filament's trying to force through itself. So you'll notice when you withdraw it after a jam, it's got like a cup of melted PLA around the tip. That's because it's trying to force through itself, which is why it jams. So you basically want to print PLA through a PTFE lined hot end, in my opinion anyway. You only really want an all metal hot end if you're printing at higher temperatures, where you want that higher temperature resistance, which PTFE can't provide. So in terms of the filaments, you can try oil. An oiler may help. The community is divided on that. I don't really use them, but you might find an oiler which puts a thin coat of machine oil on the filament may stop it jamming. But honestly, my personal advice is to, yeah, as you said, change filament providers or stick a PTFE lined hot end if you're only printing PLA, or just stick with printing ABS. Because yeah, the jamming is definitely a real issue and something I did encounter on the up printers. Okay, next one is from Dave. So he's saying, with so many printers and so many slicers available, and the vast majority at very good standard, is it becoming easy or more difficult to establish a testing regime for them all? I would say it's become impossible. And I did mention that in my recent slicer sort of video on good free slicers I recommend for 2017. But basically, machines vary so much, quality of filaments vary so much, and slicing parameters vary so much. There is no way I could provide any kind of meaningful data to you guys about what slicer is better, because I could make Repetier with the Cura engine print well, like with this cat. It's not too bad, but I could also make, Simplify 3D print crap, and that's $150 US. I can make Simplify 3D print amazingly, and I can make, so you see what I mean? It's just in terms of tuning and fine tuning, every print is different, every slicer is slightly different, and every filament is different. PLAs are the same brand of different colors will print differently in terms of how much they string and what temperature is best for them. It's so many variables. So yeah, I would say it's actually impossible, and I'm not going to do another slicer showdown in that regard, simply because any results I get would probably not be able to be reproduced, and they probably won't really be useful in terms of other people in the market. Right, next one from Muse Laboratory. Do you have any experience with optically clear FDM filaments, or even any filaments that have extremely low opacity? If so, any tips for using them? That's a great question, actually. So, in terms of optically clear, the PETs are the best for water clear filaments, but anyone who's printed with clear filaments will know it looks silvery. That's because of the refractions of the filament. So to print as clear as possible, you want to stick a huge nozzle on your printer, maybe 0.6 or 0.8, and print with 100% fill at a really slow speed and as coarse a layer height as you can get away with, probably 0.45 or 0.5 if you've got a 0.6 nozzle, and print really slow, as dense as possible to squeeze any air gaps out and make sure the part's 100% dense, because any air gaps or any irregularities will cause issues with your opacity and make the part no longer transparent. Once you've done that, you can then polish it and step through finer grit sandpaper to the point you get to polishing cloth, and you can polish the PET to look water clear. There is a video, a tutorial somewhere on making water clear lenses. I forgot who did it, but it is possible. It's just really, really tedious. But you can do it if you really want to. It's definitely possible. All right, one final one from J-Wall. What are your thoughts on 4D printing? Right, well, I'm sure that's a bit of a joke, but 4D printing is a real thing. It's a bit of a stupid term. We're not printing time, we're printing something that happens afterwards. So this whole 4D idea is basically you have an object and then it reacts to stimuli, or it will assemble, or something happens after the process. So for example, you could have a flower that prints closed, and when water touches it, it opens up. That's 4D printing. You can have a dress that you pull it out and it self-assembles. That's 4D printing. So I don't know, I think it's a bit of a gimmick in some circumstances, but as we get forward and push forward to multi-material printing that's reliable, we will start to see 4D stuff where you actually could print entire walking robots that work straight out of the machine. I know that has happened with some powder systems, but with the advent of printing flexibles and rigids at the same time, we can start doing really complicated things with 4D printing. I just hate the term. I think it's a terrible term. It doesn't make any sense. We're not printing time. We're just printing things that can, I guess, take another stage of manufacturing after they've been printed. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. Look forward to another 3D printing Q&A very soon. Thank you so much for your questions, guys, on Patreon. I really do appreciate it. And if you're interested in supporting the channel through Patreon, I'd love to have you on board. It does help me keep doing what I'm doing here on Maker's Muse on YouTube. Helps me pay for my internet bills, pay for this set, and all that sort of thing. Anyway, I look forward to seeing you again very shortly, guys, here on Maker's Muse. Catch you later, guys. Bye.
It is the latter half of the 20th century, and man has sent rockets into deep space. He has placed satellites into orbit. He has actually walked in space.